Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all the things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20-somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're covering seasonal and situational depression. We aren't talking about clinical depression here, as we are definitely not experts in that field. Having both gone through short seasons of situational and seasonal depression, we do feel qualified to talk about our experiences in that realm. Often at this time of the year, seasonal depression in the Northern Hemisphere raises its head. We live where it gets fairly cold, and this year we've had more ice and snow than usual. It's natural to want to hibernate, but when does that want to do nothing, stay home, and cozy up in bed actually turn into low-level depression? We're in some dark times, and many in our circles have experienced some really heavy things in the last year or so. Heck, maybe even in the last decade, if I'm being honest. How do we allow our emotions, process and integrate what's happened, and then move forward with a lighter spirit and renewed energy to reclaim our lives? Let's chat. I'm Marcy, and I'm the mom.
I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. There are a lot of things that young adults experience for the first time without the benefit of the life experience that their parents have, because obviously we've gone through less life than our parents. It's easy to get down, feel overwhelmed, and maybe even question your choices. When we start to feel this way, it's easy to slide into a really low vibe state and to stay there for a while. So, learning how to bounce back and get back on track is something that many of us don't have much practice at. So, today we're going to talk about that. So, Mom, kind of to open up the conversation, when have you experienced seasonal or situational depression, and what was that like for you? Kind of what was your experience with that?
Okay, so I'll talk about seasonal depression first. So I lived for the first 41 years of my life in Minnesota or Wisconsin, the very brief episode in third or fourth grade when I was too little to know what that was in Ohio. But as an adult living way north in the United States, January got really long for me. January up that far up north is often very, very gray for weeks, sometimes the whole month. And a lot of times the actual temperature does not rise above 0 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks at a time. And I had a really tough time with not seeing the sun. That was really hard for me. So actually, one of the things when we moved to Kansas, we live in Wichita or near Wichita, and Wichita actually has more sunny days a year than places in Florida. So that made me feel good because to me, the sun is kind of something that really helps me. But I remember a lot of winters getting really down kind of in that January timeframe. Your commutes to work were not predictable because there was always snow or ice or something getting in the way. I remember a 9-mile commute taking me 2 hours many times. And so you get in that cycle, and it was really hard for me to not get down and to not feel horrible about horrible about that. So, here this year we've had a lot more snow and ice, as I alluded to, than usual. And they don't take care of the roads here like they do up north because they don't have the equipment. But I just got super, super tired of all of the ruts and trying to drive around in the mess and driveways being slippery and all of that. And so I just found myself being like, I would rather just stay home. Right. That's not truly my nature, right, to want to stay home. And so for me, that's kind of a flag. So that's when I've experienced seasonal depression. Situational depression, a lot of times for me, has surrounded either the death of a loved one, massive things going on that are very traumatic for society, kind of that collective trauma. So whether that be political changes, whether that be a pandemic, whatever that might be, it's very easy in those types of situations to slide into a lower vibe state, or people who lose jobs, people who have been looking for a new job for a long time or unemployed for a long time, situations like that, tough marriages, a child who's sick. There's situational things that have caused me to slide into brief, what I would call situational depression in my life. So how about you, Cade? When have you experienced either seasonal and or situational depression?
For sure. Kind of like you, I'm going to start with seasonal. For me, it definitely comes in the winter. I think that's when that comes for most people. And I've actually learned this year, I think the root of that is just not being able to be outside. I really enjoy going for walks, playing tennis or pickleball with my friends outside. I like a lot of outdoor activities, being able to go for runs outside and things like that. So I think when those being able to do those activities and stuff is taken away from me because of the weather, I think that is where it kind of gets at me. Um, and I've been able to find solutions. You know, if I want to go for a walk, it's like, okay, I'll walk on the treadmill. Or if I want to go for a run, I'll run on the treadmill or things like that. But there's certain things that you can't, you know, walking on the treadmill is very different from walking outside, you know, on a trail or something like that. So I think that that is kind of where my seasonal depression comes from. It's really not necessarily that it's cold or that it's snowy. And, you know, you can bundle up and go for a walk when it's cold, but that's just not necessarily the most convenient. Or there's ice on the sidewalks and you don't want to slip and fall or things like that. So I think seasonal depression for me, that's kind of where it comes from. Because, you know, I love the holiday season, I love all of that, but I think that side of winter, when it kind of takes away those outside activities, that is what gets me down. And then for situational depression, I notice mine comes in a lot when I'm busy. That is when my most like seasonal depression comes in, especially, you know, working full time, being in school full time, you know, trying to hang out with friends and all this other stuff that I have going on. I think that sometimes it just gets kind of overwhelming and it just leads me to want to shut down. So that's where kind of my situational depression comes in. I think a lot of times, Mom, like you kind of talked about, like death of a loved one and things like that, those don't necessarily tend to get me down for an extended period of time. You know, I may be sad, you know, when it happens and then when there's a funeral or something like that, but I don't typically find myself, and I haven't really lost anyone too close to me in my life yet. So maybe that will change, you know, when and if, not if, but when that happens. But so I think that mine mostly just comes from when I'm busy, when I'm stressed, when a lot's going on. And I think that stems from not being able to take time to spend with myself and, you know, work on my self care. Cause, you know, when I get busy, then things like, you know, just chilling in bed and not doing anything, that kind of takes a back seat. So I don't get that time to relax. And then it just is kind of a cycle that I get stuck in.
Yeah, and I know, we're pretty hardy being from Minnesota, but when it is not safe for you to run outside, which is the difference, right? Like I remember your
Mm-hmm.
dad running in the dead of winter and coming home with like icicles on his eyelashes, but the roads and the sidewalks had been cleared.
Mm-hmm.
So it was safe to do that. You can't take your dogs on the treadmill. You're not getting the sunshine and the fresh air when you're on the treadmill. And so I can totally
Mm-hmm.
understand how that happens. And then the busy and overwhelm, like my trigger for when I know that you're feeling that way is you put on what you call your rotting shirt. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's about to
Mm-hmm.
crawl in bed and he's about to stay there for a hot minute and just
Mm-hmm.
give himself some downtime and gather his thoughts. Kate, so how do you know you're not just having a bad day or week and might actually be experiencing low level depression?
For sure. I think one thing for me that I notice is how long it takes, you know, with that feeling of sadness or feeling down. Because it is normal to have, you know, bad days. And sometimes it's not even necessarily something bad happens, but you just wake up and you're not in the mood to, you know, do life that day. And I think that that is normal. But I think when it goes on for a while, that is one thing that kind of, you know, gets me to stop and think if it's more than a week, more than a few days, then, you know, it kind of starts to raise a little flag for me. And I think another kind of way that I'm able to tell the difference is if I have that feeling of feeling kind of stuck or feeling like I can't get out of that, you know, that rut, that is when I notice it's a difference for me. Because kind of like when I talked about of sometimes, you know, falling into, you know, a little bit of situational depression when I'm super busy, is a lot of times I can think, okay, you know, I'm not feeling the best right now, but I know when school is over in 2 weeks, then I'll have more free time. Or when I finish this project at work, I'll have more free time, or whatever it may be. So I think when I can kind of see a light at the end of the tunnel, and or I see a way out, or I say, okay, I can, you know, take this off my plate and that'll be able to help me. If I can find a solution, to me, that is more of like, okay, I'm just down because of life circumstances at the moment. But I think if I am continually down for days, weeks at a time, and I don't know what it is, and I can't link it to work or school or what's going on in my personal life or things like that, then that's when it, to me, kind of flips the switch from just being a bad day or a bad week to maybe some depression. But what about you, Mom? How do you kind of tell the difference between those two?
Yeah, for me, it manifests in a couple of ways. Like I will notice that my number of numbing behaviors will skyrocket. So like I
Mm-hmm.
will find myself, I really try to kind of tightly control the amount of time I spend on social media. But when I'm sitting and scrolling for an hour
Mm-hmm.
or two, right? Or falling into the TikTok never land, right?
Uh-huh.
And when I'm doing it at bedtime, like I'm getting in bed at 10, but then I can't sleep. And so I try reading, that doesn't work. So then I might be on TikTok. And those are behaviors that I don't normally do. So I notice those types of behaviors on the increase. I also know and have learned that being busy is actually a trauma response and a survival technique. So you hear of fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? Being overly busy is a type of fighting. And so I will notice that it's like my calendar might be packed. And so I will on purpose, like, look, I'll be like, okay, let me see how tight this really is and how many things are really on my calendar. And I'm like, ooh, I didn't notice that stuff had crept up like that. So if I am seeing those behaviors in myself, like you said, a day or two here or there, not a big deal. But when it's going, a week or two, and I have epilepsy, and so lack of sleep is a huge issue for me. And so that's why I've kind of had to, really make sure that I've tightened up my sleep routine. And so I will really notice when it gets down to that elemental piece that I know is the number one most important thing that I can do for my own health, and I'm letting that slack, that's when I know. Also ability to focus, I think for me has really been something. Now, part of that is menopause, right? Which has been addressed elsewhere. But if all of a sudden I am feeling brain fog, if all of a sudden I feel like I can't concentrate or I can't focus on what's really important to me at that time, I will look a little bit and I'll be like, okay, why am I having so much trouble focusing? And a lot of times it's because my energy isn't where it needs to be. So we talk a little bit, we use the words around here about like low vibe emotions and high vibe emotions. And so if you're in a real low vibe state, how long do you stay there, right? So one of the things I learned through my life coaching process is that life is 50-50. Like we go around expecting that we are going to be high vibe all the time. And then we get down on ourselves when we're not. But it's all about when you've done the work on personal growth yourself and you have tools in your toolbox, how long do you stay down there, right? You eventually get so that you can rebound faster. Like life's not going to be all sunshine and roses, and that's toxic positivity if that's going on. People tell you to, pull up your big girl panties and just get on with it, right? I've heard that many times in my life. I've probably even said that before I learned new things, right? And new ways to approach things. But I think really just being aware of what are the behaviors you see in yourself can help you to determine, is it just a bad day, a bad week? I've tracked stuff before in my calendar, like even if it's just a check mark, like, yep, this is day 3 that I'm feeling like this. Am I still feeling that on day 7? Or I'll put a reminder note in my phone, like at the 2-week point, if I've had like 3 days where I've been kind of down, I'll put a reminder, just like a little alarm in my phone for a couple of weeks, right? To just be check in. Hey, how are you feeling? So that's kind of how I know whether it's a bad day or a bad week.
For sure.
So
So
go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, when you talked about like that toxic positivity, how do you find the balance between feeling your emotions and being sad, whether it's because something happened or you're just feeling off or whatever it may be, but also, working towards being able to rise up out of that and get back to a more level emotional state. Because you don't want to just jump and be like, okay, I'm completely fine and everything's good, but you also don't want to sit in that sadness. So how do you kind of find that balance?
Yeah. So another thing I learned in coaching that, most emotions will move through your body in 90 seconds if you just sit with the emotion. But if you continue to try to push past it without actually dealing with it, it's going to stay until you deal with it. Right. So, allowing yourself that time, whether it is putting on your rotting shirt and crawling in bed and realizing that, hey, I just need to be in my cocoon right now, and just allowing yourself to feel the feelings, right? Like that has to come first. If you don't deal with that emotion, you can't go through other steps to get there. So I think it's hard sometimes, especially if your schedule is packed like yours is, and like mine sometimes can be, it's hard to find that pocket of time. And you have to make time. You have to make time for your mental health. And I think moving yourself to the top of your to-do list is super important, because you're going to be ineffective at work, at school, in your relationships if your batteries are completely drained, right? So, one of the things that I do is when I'm noticing those signs we've talked about, and I really feel like maybe I'm dealing with some low level depression, there are things that I do. And so we'll talk about those in a minute. But what I start doing is like introducing one thing at a time and see if things are getting better. But all of that comes after being able to sit for however long it takes, right, for that emotion to move through. Like I said, most will take 90 seconds, and you can actually feel it leave your body if you are
Mm-hmm.
still and quiet enough to just be like, oh, I'm so angry, like when something happens. And then you just sit with that anger and allow it and figure out, where do you feel it? What color is that emotion inside your
Mm-hmm.
body? What part of your body is all stirred up because of it? And, we walk around with our shoulders tense and hunched up and, because of reactions to those. But really, if you just let all of that move through you and let that go, that is the way that I find the balance, is to be able to, okay, number one, we're going to feel the emotion. Number two, we're going to start trying some things to get back to that higher vibe
Mm-hmm.
emotional state. It is not a let the emotion go through you. Oh, it's going to be over, and now I feel fabulous, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not the way it goes. So
Mm-hmm.
how would you say that you balance between allowing those feelings, but then getting yourself back on track to
Mm-hmm.
raise your emotional state?
For sure. I think one thing you mentioned was kind of blocking out that time to take care of yourself. And I think, especially, I most days up from like 5, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And I'm usually constantly doing something throughout that time, whether it be working out, working, homework, whatever it be. And I think just as easy as it is to put time in your calendar to go to work or to go to the gym or to do homework or to go to dinner with your friends or whatever, you can also block off time in your calendar to take care of yourself. Um, and I think I might have talked about this in the previous episode when we were talking about self care, but I will look at my calendar and I'll say, okay, Thursday when I get off work, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to do any homework. I'm not going to call anybody. I'm not going to respond to anybody's text. I'm just going to sit on my phone, or I'm going to watch a movie, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to go for a walk, or whatever it feels right that I need to do at that moment in time. I'll block time out for that. And in turn, does that mean that maybe the next day or the day before I have to spend extra time doing homework? Maybe, but I think that it's important to block off that time. And then, like you said, I think it's important to feel the emotions too. I think if you try to force yourself to feel it, you're not gonna get the satisfaction out of it that you want. But I also think if you try to suppress it, you're never gonna solve it. It's just gonna build up and it's gonna end up being worse. So feel that emotion for what it is. And a lot of times when you talk about the emotion moving through you through 90 seconds, a lot of times you'll realize that you might just need to let out a big sigh, or when you're in your car alone, you might need to let out a scream and then you're fine. And so I think feeling those emotions and just whatever feels right in that moment. If something at work is frustrating you, instead of, sitting there trying to figure it out, well, get up and just walk away and go to the break room and just take a second, feel how frustrated you are, and then go back to it and work at it. And a lot of times, I think feeling those emotions clear your mind and allows you to be able to look at those situations more clearly. So I think the same thing goes if you are having a problem in your relationship, instead of maybe arguing back and forth constantly and you're just feeling angry. I think to me that is kind of what I mentioned with forcing those emotions out. I'm trying to force this conversation and trying to be angry and express to you how angry I am. But I think if you can take a step back and take a, even if it's just 2 minutes to yourself and think, okay, I'm angry, this is why I'm angry, take a deep breath, you're able to go back into that situation with a clearer mind. So I think whether it is anger or sadness or depression or whatever it is, if you take some time to think about those emotions and think why you're feeling them, how you're feeling them, what's making you feel them, I think that can be a great tool to kind of find that balance where it allows you to feel the emotions, but it doesn't get you stuck there for so long.
I love that both of those things are kind of a gift of time that you're giving yourself, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that moving yourself to the top of the priority list, putting that time for yourself on the calendar. I remember when I first heard schedule the things that you need for yourself first on your calendar. So whether
Mm-hmm.
that's workout time, whether that's time with your family, whether that's time with your pets, whether that is time for you to just be still, right? And be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And those things need to be on your calendar first, and they need to be non-negotiable. And I call it white space. Like I make sure that there are blocks of white space in my calendar, and it doesn't matter to me really where in the day that white space happens. It just
Mm-hmm.
has to be there. And there are some weeks where there's only 2 or 3 blocks, but there's never going to be a week in my life anymore, ever again, where there are no white space blocks. And I honor
Mm-hmm.
those just like I would honor an appointment with someone who's my supervisor, or like I would honor, a date with you or whatever that
Mm-hmm.
might look like. So yeah, I love that you would give yourself the gift of time there. But then also, if you are feeling stressed out and it involves another person or involves a situation, to give yourself the gift of time to not respond immediately and walk away. And
Mm-hmm.
with the intention of coming back. And obviously, if you're walking away from another human, like being able to communicate with them that it's a good idea. If I walk away right now, I need a little space. And then you can come back to it from a much healthier headspace when you've allowed that emotion to move
Mm-hmm.
to move through you. So I love that idea. What other ways do you find it helpful to move back into that high vibe status, Cade? Like if you had to give someone a list of things to try, what things are on your list?
Mm-hmm. So I think the biggest thing on my list, which I've actually thought about recently, is when you are in those states of, maybe a little slight depression, low vibes, whatever it is, I like to think about a time when I was happy, and not necessarily a certain day, but more like a period of time. Think about a time where you were happy, where things were going good, and think about what you were doing in that time. Were you waking up earlier? Were you getting your daily workout in the morning? Were you eating better? Were you drinking less? Whatever it is that you were doing, were you spending more time with yourself? Whatever it is that you were doing, think about what you were doing in that time and kind of try to emulate that. I think that that's something that's been really helpful for me recently. Because, like I said, a lot of times, especially if you're busy, a lot of things are going on, it's easy to just get caught up in that. But if you think about what was going on in your life when things were going good, were
Mm.
you hanging out with a specific friend? Were you maybe you weren't in a relationship at that point in time and now you are in a relationship, and that relationship can be causing you this feelings, whatever it may be. Think about maybe what's changed, what you used to do that you're not doing anymore, what you started doing, and try to recreate that. I think that that's been something that's been really helpful for me, because a lot of times I think the things that make us happy aren't necessarily what we think makes us happy. A lot of times it can be simple things like, oh, when I was happy, there was this new song that came out and I was listening to it every morning on the drive to work. So now, I listen to that again, and not that that's going to, completely turn around and boost your mood, but it's just as a positive reinforcement of, oh, I know me and my best friend talk about this all the time. Music for me and her has a really big meaning. So a lot of times, for example, like on some of our trips, we usually always have a couple songs that have come out recently on those trips that will play a lot on those trips. So it's like, okay, if I'm feeling down, I'll play one of these songs and it'll remind me of her, remind me of that trip, remind me of, everything going on with that. And it'll bring a little happiness. So I think thinking about things that brought you joy or that were involved in your life in a time of joy can definitely be very helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea, is looking back and seeing when did I feel in that high vibe state, and kind of what,
Mm-hmm.
what was I doing, because sometimes we let things slide out of our lives that we maybe haven't even thought about the fact about how important music is to you, right? But if all of a sudden you find yourself so busy that you're not listening to music, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
there are days where like you've got stuff playing all day long, and
Mm-hmm.
whether you're doing schoolwork or you're doing work or whatever it might be. And then sometimes when your music is silent upstairs in our house in what we call HQ, and so yeah, it's very interesting that if you look back at doing those things that have always meant a lot to you. I know for me too, it's what habits was I doing at that time. So for me, morning routine has become a really big thing. So I actually have changed the name to morning ritual. A lot of people talk about morning routine, but I like ritual better because it feels a little more magical and a little less rigid. You all know I don't like the word goals. I like wishes and dreams and visioning. So my morning ritual, right, is sacred to me. There is a cup of coffee, there is a candle, there is soothing music playing. I am journaling and I am reading nonfiction. Like those things, if I try to go into the world without having done those things in the morning, I am easy to pull off of my happy train, for lack of a better word. I'm more
Mm-hmm.
easily influenced by what happens out in the world. But if I start my morning with that, I have gotten my head, my heart, my soul all in the right space, all in alignment, and I can put up with the crap that's
Mm-hmm.
out there. So remembering the things that you do that actually keep you steady, that bring you peace, that make you feel centered is really important. I think another thing that I've done, I went and bought both a salt lamp and a sunlight. And so if there are times when it is gray and like I will plug those in and just sit in front of it while I work at my computer. It is amazing how that can help. There are times when maybe it is sunny outside, but I've been stuck inside because of everything I need to get done. I'll just get in my car and drive with my sunroof open. right? It can be freezing outside, but I'm getting some sunshine. My heated seat is on. I've got my heat on. So it feels like maybe I'm absorbing some
Hmm.
sunshine, or, go wander around your favorite store without an intention to buy anything. Where are the places that make you feel high vibe, that every time you're in there, you feel really great about that? So who are the people that make you feel high vibe? Can you get something on the calendar this week, right? With that person, whether that be a walk or it's to meet for a coffee or for dinner, whatever that might look like. So those are things that I use. Sometimes I'm not a napper at all, but sometimes just going and taking a nap is necessary. And it kind of pushes the reset button. The other thing is add water. And I have said this since my kids were little. Like, if you have a kid who's out of sorts, or you have an old person that's out of sorts, like, put them in the shower, take them to the pool, go to the beach, do whatever you need to do. But when you add water, there is something very calming and soothing, and that can help things level out a little bit. Also, there are supplements out there that you can buy at your local store. I know for me, there's one in particular. If you want to know what that is, DM me and I will tell you, because I'm not going to get on here and preach what that is. But there is one for me that if I am in a low period, I will go buy some and I start taking it. And within 2 or 3 days, I feel better. Now, could all be in my head, but I do know that I am not the only person that I know that has been helped by that. I have recommended it to my kids when they're feeling low. It's something you can buy at your local big box store, your grocery store, Walgreens, whatever it might be. So again, DM me if you want to know what that is. But I think there's a lot of tools out there. Exercise is great. Any kind of movement. Doesn't have to be running a marathon, doesn't have to be lifting weights, but just a simple walk around the block. Love on your animals, love on your family, like, do something fun, insert some joy into your day. So those things all help me get back into a more high vibe status, of course, after we've moved through the immediate emotion, right?
Hmm. I definitely agree with that. So, Mom, what's an effective way for young adults to communicate that they may be in a depressed state with their parents? I know sometimes, especially when we are young adults, we're moved out of the house. We've talked about this before. You're out of your parents' daily orbit. It's easy for you to kind of pick up on my emotions because we're in the same house. You can tell if I'm happy or if I'm sad or if I'm stressed or whatever it is. But for a lot of bigs, they're not in close proximity to their parents. So how can we share that with our parents instead of hiding it and maybe trying to navigate it all alone?
Yeah, I think number one, you start when your kids are younger, right? And if you haven't, it's not too late to start that. But just reaching out, to your parent and say, hey, just wanted to hear your voice. Things are a little tough right now. Just opening that conversation, because your parent probably is going to say, oh, what's going on? And if they try to jump in and solve it for you, you can say, you know what? Even preemptively, right? If they have a habit of trying to solve things for you, you can say, I just need you to listen. I just wanted you to know. I don't want you to fix this. I just wanted you to know. So just opening that door and that conversation can be really helpful. Sometimes it's just hearing a parent's voice. I know that has really helped your brother that lives away. Like, there are times where it's just like he pops up on FaceTime, and, popping up on video, I think, has been way more helpful for him living away than just hearing my voice, even, right? Because he can see my face and it makes you feel a little more like you're in the same room. So call your parents on
Hmm.
some kind of video platform, because that really does bring just an extra level to that. Text them, right? Don't just go radio silent for a couple of weeks, because parents really do start to worry when they don't hear from their kids. And, I always tell parents, especially when their kids first move out, I'm like, you let them dictate the cadence of how often you're calling and checking in. You don't want to be that needy parent that is like, I need to hear from you every night by 9 o'clock. Like, that's not
Hmm.
healthy. Your child is a young adult and they are living on their own. But you also don't want that to be, I'm going a month without talking to you, unless, of course, like we've talked before, if there's a toxic parenting relationship going on. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about somewhat healthy, marginally dysfunctional, we all are, right?
Hmm.
Relationships between kids and their parents. So I would say definitely reach out, and don't wait until you think you're really in the danger zone.
Hmm.
And because parents will want to swoop in and rescue. If you get the call from your kid and they're at college and they are having a horrible time and you just want to go pick them up, you want to go pick them up and you want to solve it for them. And really, it's their life, it's their journey, and you can stand beside them and you can help walk them through things, but they've got to make decisions on whether they get help, on if they're in the right situation, whether what that looks like. You can suggest things like I've had a laundry list before, whether it be my kids or my friends, or, well, have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Let's try all those things for a week. And that's simple things: water, movement, sunshine, the supplement I was talking about, your vitamin D, like making sure all of those things are in check and you're eating well. And if you're doing all those things and things still aren't better, red flag, right? So I think that's what kids can do, is really just initiate that conversation. If your parent contacts you and says, hey, I haven't heard from you in a week, right? Are you doing okay? Feel free to be honest with them. Like, I know very few parents who want their kid to feel miserable. Like that's just not a thing. And so they want to be your safe place to come and to share that information with. So if bigs are noticing that a parent is suffering, maybe with some seasonal or situational depression, what ideas do you have for how they can support and encourage their parents?
For sure. I think something that goes for either bigs talking towards their parents or parents talking towards their bigs, kind of, going on both sides of the question, is a lot of times I think that we think that if I tell my parent that, I'm not feeling the best and I'm maybe going through some depression, that I need to share everything. I need to share exactly what's happening and share the reason why I need to share everything. So I think sometimes, especially as a kid, and I know, especially, speaking from my experience with you, is you are a very like passionate and involved mother. And if there's something you can do, you want to do it. Or if there's something bothering us, you want to know what it is and see if you can help. But I think especially as you get older, it's okay to, tell your parent, hey, mom, hey, dad, I'm not feeling the best right now. I'm kind of stressed or I'm depressed or whatever. And I don't really want to talk about it, but I just, I want to have a conversation with you. Can we go out to dinner and just, get my mind off of it? Or I just wanted to FaceTime you to, talk to you, and kind of, like you said earlier when you were talking about you and Sawyer FaceTiming, is you kind of get that joy just from talking to your parents. So I think that it doesn't necessarily need to be tell me what's wrong, tell me what's going on. And I think same thing with, bigs, if they notice that a parent is struggling, you don't need to find the root cause of what's going on with your parent. If they want to share that, if you guys have that relationship, I know, you and I personally do. If something's bothering you, I know that most of the time you'll tell me what it is. And if something's bothering me, most of the time I'll tell you what it is. But knowing that it's okay to not say that. If I notice that you're stressed or you're, maybe feeling a little down or whatever, maybe just saying, hey, mom, you want to go to dinner on Tuesday night? And we don't need to talk about why you're sad. We don't need to talk about what's stressing you out. If you want to, great. But just more so being there for them and not necessarily trying to solve the problem. And I think that goes for parents to bigs and bigs to parents as well, is just being there for them, especially with parents and especially parents of bigs as their kids get older. I know, just speaking from experiences with my friends' parents, as well as knowing your friends and things like that, a lot of parents, once their bigs grow up and they really truly are bigs, a lot of them feel kind of lost and sometimes can feel kind of sad, even if your parent isn't, overly involved in your life growing up. It still is, a hard change. You and I have talked about this off the podcast, but you've been a mom with a child living in your house for 27-ish years, 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I move out in a couple months, that's a big change for you. So I think that, sometimes parents go through a lot of adjustments, and it's important for bigs to be there and just to remind them, like, I'm still your kid. I'm still here. I still, want to tell you about what happened at work or, things like that. So I think that that's important, just to be there for your parent and support them through it, whether that means that they're sharing with you what's going on or you're just going to get coffee.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of times, especially young bigs, are still in a developmental phase where they're very egocentric and they think a lot about what's going on in their life, but they don't often reflect back onto how all the changes they're making and excited to make might not feel exciting to their parents, right? The parent might be excited for you, but they're maybe not excited for the situation. So I love that you brought that up. And so to encourage kids to really, as they become bigs, one of the beautiful things about a relationship between a parent and a big is that it switches from parenting to guiding for a short period of time, right? At 18, they're a legal adult, but their brains aren't fully formed till they're 25. They still need support and guidance, right? And then it turns into more of a friendship. and you're doing life together. And in a lot of ways, it's a very unique relationship because you know each other's entire history. Like I have known you your entire life. No friends that you could ever make, right, are ever going to have known you your entire life and to have known situations you've gone through and things we've struggled with and things that have made us really happy. And so I think it is a very unique relationship that can be treasured from the time you turn into a big all the way until your parents are no longer here, right? Which is the natural order of things. And hopefully that's the way it happens for every family. Like we never want a parent to have to bury their kid. Like that's just not the way things are supposed to happen. But to be able to treasure that relationship and to be there for each other, I think is really important because it is a unique relationship that you share with your big or with your parents. So, you know, seasonal or situational depression is usually a temporary state, but if it goes longer than a few weeks, like we've talked, please seek professional help with a therapist, your physician, to see if you need to get assessed and maybe need some additional support. Depression can be a very, very scary beast. And so getting professional attention sooner rather than later is important. It's normal to experience shifts in your level of positivity about life. It's normal to feel off or low for a brief period of time, but it's also normal to wonder if this is something more serious. So talking about it with family or your chosen family, that can be aunts, uncles, cousins, friends, neighbors, people you meet at work, like you have a big community around you. So if you don't have parents you can talk to about this stuff, a chosen family is a great place to start. Talking about it with your family or chosen family is step one in figuring out if you need help. Or instead, if you need to institute some daily practices to help move you back to feeling better about things, back to a state of hope and more lighthearted energy. Kate, any closing thoughts you'd like to share about seasonal or situational depression before you close us out?
For sure. I think, like you said, it's okay to go through periods of time where you're sad, where you're down, where you're out, but just being able to, be conscious of how you're feeling and understand, okay, is this just a temporary feeling? Is something more serious going on? And not being afraid to ask for help, whether that be with family, friends, loved ones, a professional help. I think there's some stigma in our society that it's bad to be depressed or going through a down state or that things are wrong, but it's okay to get help. And I think we all go through periods of time and where we're down. And it's important to just remember that you can get out of it. There is light at the end of the tunnel, whether that be you pull yourself out of the rut or you're able to get help that can lead you out of it. But with that being said, I think that is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. We thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and maybe even an action step or two. Again, we are not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit more joy-filled for those who are listening. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Please subscribe and share with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it. A new episode is released on those three platforms every single week.
You can visit my life coaching website at marcihawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
My handle across all social media platforms is at the Cade Berrigan. That's where you can find me. Best way to contact us or give us feedback is to DM either one of us on social media or reach out on the contact me page on my mom's website. Again, that is marcihawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, questions, or topic ideas that you may like to share, and we will see you next time on Raising Bigs.